Hello and welcome to our Friday Lives with Galt Advocacy. It's good to have everybody. And if you're watching this later on, it's glad to have you watching our video. And I am Dakota. I'm filling in for Caleb today. He is our usual live guy, but he's taking a break this week, and so I'm helping him out. We're going to be talking about IHSS. We're going to talk about Protective Supervision today. We're going to get in all that stuff. But first, just leave a comment. Let us know how you're doing today. It's, end of the week. I always like doing these lives on Friday because, it's the end of the work week. We have to have a relaxing weekend. So let me know how you're doing. Now, I don't know about everywhere else in California, but where I am, it is like the hottest week of the year right now. It was like 95, 96, 97 these last couple of days. It's probably even worse some other places. So tell me about that. How's that going? It can only get better. That's what I'm hoping. It can only get better from here because there's no way this is not the hottest week of the year. So glad to have everybody. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to Alaska to get away from it pretty soon here. But today we're going to be talking about protective supervision. It's one of our favorite topics here, of course, and it's one that I know the most about. So I was able to, take care of it for Caleb today. But specifically, we're going to be talking about when you're trying to get protective supervision, what are excluded behaviors? This is something that a lot of people don't know this term right now, but you've probably heard, if you've gone through this process, you've probably heard some of these types of behaviors. And we talk about it a lot on our lives here, but we're going to go deep dive into which behaviors do not count for the need for protective supervision. Before we get into that, I'll just really quickly say, if you're watching us and you like the content we do and you want to, share it with more people and sort of boost our reach, go ahead and give it a like, give it a share. Absolutely. Leave any comments. If you have anything IHSS related, any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comment section. I love tackling anything people have on their minds, IHSS related. And especially if you know someone that could use this information who, needs to know this kind of thing. Let them know. Let them know that, that we're talking all about IHSS today. All right, so I'm just going to jump right into our topic, and the majority of our information is coming from two ACLs, ACL 1525 and ACL 1795. So if you want to look up this information later, that's where you can find it. Maybe we'll post it later in the description or in the comment section. Other than that, this is mostly coming from my own experience and our company's experience and how these regulations are applied to people on a day-to-day basis. 1525 and 1795 is the other one. All right, so what are excluded needs and behaviors? First off, this is when you're trying to get protective supervision. So when you're trying to get protective supervision, they'll say, okay, you need to have a certain number of unsafe behaviors. You have to have unsafe behaviors. They have to be unpredictable. And if you have a 24-hour need for supervision, then you can get protective supervision. However, there are certain behaviors that they will say, this behavior does not count. You cannot get protective supervision for this need or that need. And this is where the excluded needs come in. And it says in the regulations, if your need for supervision is solely based on excluded needs, then even if you're mentally impaired, even if you're non-self-directing, even if you are likely to put yourself in danger, if it's only because of excluded needs, then you cannot get protective supervision. So what's the first one? The first one, I'm going to use the paper to guide me through this. The first one is you cannot get protective supervision for friendly visiting or social activities. Now, it's not clear exactly what counts as friendly visiting. Like if a person comes over to your house and then the child has a mental impairment, has a meltdown, and hurts himself, is that need caused by friendly visiting? Not really. How this typically will manifest in actual cases is that anything outside of the home that you don't need to be at they're going to say that's friendly visiting social activities. So it's kind of cold the way they apply it, but it's like this. If it's dangerous for your child to go with you to the grocery store because they might run away in front of a car, then they'll say, then don't take him to the grocery store. If it's unsafe for your child to go on a walk with you to the park because they might get hit by a car or might eat rocks, whatever, then they'll say, well, don't take him to the park. These kind of things, right? So it's essentially their way of saying, if something outside of the home that you didn't need to go to is a place where dangerous things happen, then just don't go there. And it's kind of cold the way they handle it, but that's just the way it is. And so that's the first one. And it's one of the easier ones to get around. It just means make sure the protective supervision is for needs that happen at home. Second, I do see there's a few comments in the already questions and things. I'm going to try and get to those maybe about midway through our topic. So I'll get through a couple of these and then I'll jump through some questions. Second is that you cannot get protective supervision when the need is caused by a medical condition, when a person needs medical supervision. Oh, yeah. Teresa was going to put these up on the screen as I was talking about them. That was the first one, friendly visiting, social activities. The second one is medical condition. So when need is caused by a medical condition, there's actually a specific example given in the ACL that we're talking about, ACL 1525, where they specifically mention they give an example of what might be a medical condition. So they say, a recipient who has diabetes and the need for protective supervision is to help if and when the recipient has an episode of hypoglycemia. So this is an example when a person, they have diabetes, but mentally perfectly fine. And so they only need medical care when they have an episode like that. For a person like that, it's not a reason to get protective supervision because you have to have a mental impairment which causes you to be non-self-directing. Now, there is a caveat to this one. The caveat on this one is sometimes a person's medical condition can lead to them being having a higher level of risk, which by itself isn't a reason to get it, but the person's mental impairment, if they don't understand that higher level of risk, then they can. And this is where the other ACL 1795 comes in. So one example of a medical condition that you cannot get protective supervision for is fall risk. If you're elderly, you have hip problems or knee problems, whatever it might be, and you're at risk of falling. That could be very dangerous if you fall. Well, that can't be a reason to get protective supervision. However, and it's specifically mentioned in the regulations, if a person has a mental impairment such as dementia, now we're still on number two. If a person has a mental impairment such as dementia and they have a fall risk, like they're in a wheelchair or they need to go with a walker or a cane, but because of their dementia, they don't realize that they have an increased risk and they try to walk without their assistive devices or they try to get up out of their wheelchair to walk around, and because of that, they fall, then that person can get protective supervision because of their medical condition, but not strictly because of the medical condition, but because their mental impairment causes them to do dangerous things. Going back to the diabetes example, I had another client once who had diabetes, but also had dementia. And he did not understand that he couldn't just eat whatever he wants because it could raise his blood sugar. And so a couple of times he ended up in the hospital with extremely elevated levels due to his misunderstanding of his medical condition. So, and he did get protective supervision. So there are some caveats specifically to this one. So I'll talk about one more of these and then I'll get into some of the questions and we'll move on. So the next one, there was a bit of a spoiler, but number 3 is anticipation of a medical emergency. So this one is strictly if a person could randomly have a medical condition or emergency. There is an example given on this one, and it's someone who has congestive heart failure, and at any time they could just have a heart attack. Other examples are strokes, seizures, asthma attack, perhaps. If these things can just come on randomly and the person does not have a mental impairment that causes them to be non-self-directing, then this one just doesn't doesn't count, right? It's not something they can grant protective supervision for. Is there any? I don't think there's really any exceptions to this one. This one's just a given. It's just.
Would epilepsy fall under that category?
So yeah, actually, epilepsy and seizures can be a little bit different, because sometimes, epilepsy, I guess you could end up causing it if you're not careful. I don't know about epilepsy specifically, but I know that when you have a seizure, sometimes after a seizure, a person's in a postictal state where they're confused and maybe unsure of where they are or what they're doing. They wander. And during this state, they are considered to be non-self-directing. And so while a person cannot get protective supervision for the seizure itself, sometimes the state that they're in afterwards, when they're confused and unaware of their actions, if they're likely to put themselves in danger, and if it's unpredictable when these seizures will happen, and they happen frequently, then the person may be able to get protective supervision for the seizures, but not strictly for the actual seizure itself. So there can be some complicated situations or some differences here. Okay, before I move on to the next one, let's go through some of these comments. So I'm going to grab that. Let's see. First, Kuda said, "Hi, I gave my son's social worker ABA session notes and 6 months progress report by email. She emailed back session notes not needed because she had his 6 month progress report. Can they pick and choose what is needed and not needed?" Well, what I'll say is that if you've sent them the documents, they're supposed to keep them. I don't know what your social worker is going to do necessarily, but if they receive a document that has information about your son's case, then they're supposed to put it in the file. Whether they consider it or not, it should be in the file. Now, why they say it's not needed might be because that's the older document and it's more outdated. While the 6 month progress report, if it includes all the same information but is more recent, I could understand them saying, we just need the most recent one. We don't need all of them going back. But if they are relatively different information and not just the same report twice in a row, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't want to have both. And if they both have information that's helpful to you, I definitely still give them both. But them saying it's not necessary, that's fine. Technically, nothing's needed, right? Technically, they can make their decision based on whatever documents they have available or don't have available. So I would still, if I were in your shoes, I'd be fine still sending them anything you think is going to be helpful. And whether they want it or not, that's up to them. That's whatever. Okay, let's see. Tammy. Oh, sorry. You pressed it yourself, didn't you?
I did.
I'll leave it to you. You can press the buttons. All right. Tammy says, my sister's trying to start earning the IHSS money her family really needs. It's been hard because she cannot even do orientation until October 29th. Wow, I did not realize the orientations took that long. I guess everything's getting slowed down. For a long time now, hearings have been really slow. That sometimes the decisions are coming out 2 or 3 months past their due date. And even when we complain to the state about it, they're like, yeah, we know, but what are you going to do? And it's like, well, what are we going to do? The best we can do is elevate it to a higher court. And that takes 12 months. And by the time that's done, the problem we wanted to solve is already done. So that's rough. And even in some counties, the assessments are really slow. We had someone who applied, I think it was back in April, maybe March, and heard nothing from them. It's been a really long time. And then eventually the county finally reached out and said, yeah, sorry, we're really backed up. We'll be able to come out and do your assessment probably in October, maybe in December, hopefully by the end of this year. It's like, okay, so it's going to be 6, 7, 8 months between applying to actually getting your assessment, which is crazy. It never used to be like this. So seems like every aspect of IHSS is being slowed down. I did not realize orientation was also this far behind. But thank you for the comment. Amber said, I'm trying to get PS for my 14-year-old. He is homeschooled. He does have an IEP. Should I give them triannual reports? And I'll put this one up on the screen because Teresa's writing to somebody right now. Okay. Okay, Amber. So you're trying to get for your 14-year-old. He does have an IEP. You should give him the triennial. Well, ultimately, it's going to come down to whether or not you think they're helpful. If it's, if they say a bunch of things in there that you disagree with, or you think paint him in a far more able light than is accurate, then I'd say no. But I think more often than not, the triennial reports are good to give. When the county tries to say, oh, we think the memory, we think his memory is only moderately impaired. It's not that severe. If you have a triennial report that says, oh, we tested and his memory or his communication or his orientation is in the bottom 5% or 1%, and that speaks pretty strongly against any attempt they have to say, oh, he's only mildly impaired or he's barely impaired compared to other people his age. So oftentimes triennials are somewhat useful, but it really depends on what exactly they say.
Okay, I'm putting up my comments.
Okay. Teresa, I guess, responded to the previous comment, said you can always apply for orientation right at the beginning of the case. You can become a provider without already having a client. That's true. You can just become... Yes. So for your situation, it's too late for that, but you can just become a provider in general and then be assigned the case later. There is a little bit of a cost involved in becoming a provider. There's the fingerprinting, I think, the background check. It's like, I think, yeah, it's 100 or less. It might be like 50 or 40, something like that. But yeah, that is definitely an option you can do. Let me see. Makosoy just sent us some hearts. So some hearts back to you as well. And then Teresa commented, when people make out hazard logs, they often include some of these excluded needs, which can confuse the social worker. So it's good to have a clear handle on these. That is true. And this will especially come up when we get to aggressive behavior. But yeah, even though some of these needs are still relevant to the case and might even indicate some level of memory impairment or judgment impairment, when half the things you tell the social worker are excluded behaviors, in their mind, they might, well, there's two ways to think about it. Either they might just innocently and without even realizing it, just sort of mesh them all together and think that what you said was all excluded behaviors, and they just sort of forget about the other behaviors you told them about. Or if we're not giving the benefit of the doubt, they might just hear those excluded behaviors and see that as an excuse to deny. I don't want to assume one way or another, but either way, whether it's just natural, like psychologically, they're just making connections that aren't there, or if it's malicious, either way, we try to avoid talking about excluded behaviors as much as we can for that reason. Jonathan, put Jonathan's question up. Does becoming blind in itself qualify for protective supervision? Thanks. No. However, being blind is one of the qualifying disabilities for IHSS itself. Or I don't know if it's called a disability, because I believe the exact terminology says to get IHSS you have to be either aged, blind, or disabled. But yet blind is there as you can get IHSS, but unless you also have a mental impairment which limits your understanding, memory, orientation, judgment, and you're likely to choose to do things that are dangerous, then no, you wouldn't qualify for protective supervision. Let's see. Yasmin said, my sister has a mental impairment, and she recently just had a fall while using her walker, causing brain bleed and a stroke. Now she's in a facility, but when she comes home, it will be all on the family. Could she possibly qualify? Yes, I think most likely. Now, like as you mentioned, she's in a facility right now. While she's in the facility, she cannot get IHSS during that time. However, when she comes home and she's being taken care of the family, possibly. The requirements, I mean, the mental impairment, it sounds like she had that before the fall. So the mental impairment itself could probably be a qualifying diagnosis to get IHSS. The brain bleed, I don't know how long-term that is. That's probably not a qualifying diagnosis, but the fact she has it might add to the level of need. As far as whether, sorry, what?
But she has to be eligible for Medi-Cal.
Yes, but she still has to be eligible for Medi-Cal to get IHSS. As far as whether or not she'll qualify for protective supervision, the mental impairment definitely is one of the qualifying factors. And if the fall was her doing something that she shouldn't have been doing, without real, like we were talking about before, fall risk. If she thought she could walk on her own, but she was supposed to use her cane or supposed to use a walker, and she just left it behind, she fell, then yes, that could be a reason to get protective supervision because of the lack of understanding there.
She might also qualify for WPCS.
Teresa mentions she could also possibly qualify for WPCS, which is sort of parallel to IHSS, but the wait the wait list on that is pretty long, but you could look into that as well.
This is the reason why they jump the line when you're coming out of a facility into the home.
Yes, that is one reason that they can, when a person leaves a facility and goes back into their home, they can actually get WPCS a bit faster. So that could be something to look into. We're not complete experts on how WPCS works, but it is something to look into. Tammy says, thank you for being here, and thank you for all the hearts and loves and whatnot. We really appreciate it, and a lot of great comments so far. Anna says, is there an age limit of how young you guys would advocate for protective supervision? Not strictly, but in a general sense, we heavily advise not going for anything, I'd say younger than 4 years old is extremely hard to get unless they have maybe a G-tube that they are regularly pulling at and tugging at. That is the most likely way you'd get protective supervision under 4 years old. Even over 4 years old, it's still really, really hard until probably closer to like 6 or 7. As far as the work we do, we will still take on clients who are 3 or 4, but oftentimes we might advise them to maybe not pursue a hearing or not pursue a rehearing until later, and maybe push for just, giving it some time and wait till they turn 4 years old at least, or 5. But there's not a strict age limit. But I would say younger than 3. I have never heard of anyone younger than 3 getting protective supervision. See, Amber says, thank you as well.
I had one 10 months, years ago.
Tammy said, I was informed that getting her fingerprinting done now will prevent any further delay. That, I think it's referring to orientation. That does sound wise, that, if you get down ahead of time, that will probably avoid, having to wait on it later. Yeah, that seems about right. Wow, there's a lot of great questions. Hopefully we'll have time to get to the rest of our topic, but I do want to, I want to address the stuff that you guys have on your mind first and foremost. So, Jalessa, am I reading? Yeah. Jalisa. Yeah. My son, you can put it on the screen as well. My son is 6 and was approved for 2 years for protective supervision. This year is the first time he's been denied. We have appealed, but is this common when things haven't changed? We've had the same social worker for 2 years. How can we best strengthen his case? Thank you. Okay. Now this is something that's good to know. Now we would always say, if you're going to go to a hearing, we do not advise going to a hearing by yourself. We always advise seeking help either from an advocate or some other kind of professional, or at the very least, someone who's gone through this before. As far as if he's 6 now, was approved for 2 years, and this year's been denied. Well, you do have one good thing going for you, and it's that when the county makes a decision that takes away hours, they do have a higher burden of proof. When they make a decision just regularly, when they deny you without having ever approved you in the first place, then the burden of proof is essentially just that they have to have some basis for why they believe that you can't get it, right? So as long as they can say, well, during the assessment, we were told this, or we saw the child do this or that, then they can just say that, and the judge will say, all right, you've met your burden. Now claim it. You have to explain why you believe they do need protective supervision. But when you had protective supervision and they took it away, then the burden is higher. Now the county has to show that there has been either a change in your son's behaviors, or a change in the law, a change in your living arrangements, circumstances, or they have to show that they clearly misapplied the law in some way at the previous assessment and they're now fixing it. Now, smart hearing reps, smart counties can find ways to things to point to say, oh, well, you said last year that he eloped 5 times, and this year it was only 3.5 times per week. Therefore, that's a change, so he no longer needs protective supervision. They could try that, but if they don't meet their burden, if the judge says, no, there's not been any significant changes here, you didn't misapply the law before. One of the things they can say is we did a more thorough assessment this year than the previous year. And if they can show they did a more thorough assessment and got more information, and that's why they took it away, then they can use that as an excuse to take it away. But if the judge looks and says, no, the assessment wasn't more thorough, the laws didn't change, the behaviors didn't change, and you didn't misapply the law last time, then their denial could just be thrown out right then and there. But if it doesn't, if they meet their burden, then you're right back to square one, where you now have to prove to the judge why your son needs protective supervision. So that's the one thing I would add. I mean, other than that, strengthening your case, it's all the stuff that we've talked about before, and you can maybe check out our previous videos or posts about what kind of evidence is good, what we do or do not suggest. But also, reach out to us, if you want to get more advice. Okay, moving on. Anna said, because my son will be 2 at the end of November, and he extreme headbangs along with excessive climbing, getting injuries while stimming, lack of safety awareness. You can put this one on the screen as well. I told her I'd let her do it. Okay, sorry. Extreme headbanging along with extreme climbing, getting injuries while stimming, lack of safety awareness, which I know is typical for a child his age. However, he is going to get assessed for autism. We have been to the hospital to do the headbanging and things of this sort because it is extreme. The doctor did tell me to pad all my walls, and to me that's not typical. Yeah, I would say, I mean, I'll stand by that for a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, it is still really, really hard to get protective supervision no matter what. However, headbanging to that level, I think the rest of it, the climbing, the stimming, and the lack of safety awareness, I don't think you're going to get that at all at this age. I don't think that'll even be considered a. Like I said, he'll be 2 at the end of November. Oof, man, he's really young. So yeah, I'd say everything other than the headbanging is going to be just completely thrown out. But if the headbanging is so serious that you've gone to the hospital, did you say multiple times? At least once, and the doctor suggested padding. I mean, it's possible. I'd say you have a better chance if he was like 3 at least, but it's definitely a possibility, and he will have to have a diagnosed impairment first. So if autism, that's going to be assessed, until that is a diagnosis, I don't think you can really get protective supervision. But yeah. Oh, and he followed up and said, I also got PS for my 3-year-old for some of the same behaviors because it is extreme. And yeah, I mean, if it's to that extent, the headbanging is so severe that taking him to the hospital and getting padding done, then it's a possibility. But I would say you do need to get the autism assessment first, for sure. And then at that point, I mean, trying to get for someone who's less than 2 years old, extremely tough. Junior Gazara says, can you please, can you explain the process for IHSS? I just applied 2 weeks ago. Just made an appointment for the doctor to fill out the health certification, but the appointment is a month out. Does the IHSS application expire? No, the application does not expire. Once you have sent in your application, that is your date of application. And no matter how long the process takes for you to get approved, they will pay you the hours all the way back, or pay your provider, whichever way it is. The provider will be paid all the way back to that date of application, as long as that's when they started doing the work. Now, you did say you sent the doctor to fill out the healthcare certification. There is a deadline on that, where from the day they send you the healthcare certification form to get it filled out, you have 45 days to get it filled out and to send it back. So as long as you get it back from the doctor in that time and you can send it to the county, then you're good to go. But and so that's the only deadline. After that, sometime later, you say, oh wait, you're saying the appointment with the doctor's a month out. Well, you still can probably get it in time because it's not 45 days from when you applied. It's 45 days from when they sent you the packet. So you'll probably be cutting it close, but as long as you can, like, if you get it, if the doctor fills it out and then you can send it to IHSS right away, real quickly, then you can probably still get it in within that deadline. Then after that, they'll do the application, or they'll do the assessment, and then somewhere about a month later, you'll get the NOA and you'll be all done. Okay, next is Adriana. Can my son, who is 10, he's in a wheelchair, but always scratching his face, poking his eyes, can be approved for PS? Possibly, definitely. Just like we were talking about earlier, just being in a wheelchair, that part doesn't necessarily contribute to the need for PS. However, if he does have to have a mental impairment. If that mental impairment causes him to not understand his limitations, if he tries to get up from his wheelchair, or perhaps if he wheels himself into unsafe places like downstairs or off of curbs or things that could be dangerous for him, that could be a reason to get protective supervision, as well as the scratching, poking. Those things definitely can contribute to a need for protective supervision. The main things about them is they have to be done due to they have to be caused by the mental impairment. They have to be unpredictable and frequent, and they cannot be done, and we'll actually get to this one in just a minute, they cannot be done intentionally with knowledge that they're going to cause harm. So it's certainly a possibility. Julissa said, thank you so much. And Cadence, sounds like I missed a call for. I will look into that, whatever is going on there. But okay, I'll check on that after the live. Anna said, thanks so much. And yeah, I felt like because he's so young and the headbanging is that extreme, I would use that as my main fight because there's proof that he's been doing this for a year now, starting at 1 year old. So my argument was going to be, well, why does he want to harm himself so much? He's just a baby. I don't know. I think it would really depend on if there's any examples of unimpaired children of that age who also have that level of unsafe behaviors. I really don't know what's considered a typical level of accidental self-injury for a 1 year old. Like they certainly can accidentally harm themselves a lot, but if it's that extreme that it's considered, significantly more than a typical child, then I don't know what to say. Okay, I think we've gotten through. Adriana said thank you as well. All right, great. So let's get back into our topic. We've got just a few more minutes to get through the last couple of these, but great to have so many questions. I'm really happy with that. So we're on to the fourth excluded behavior, and that one is to control antisocial or aggressive behavior. You cannot get protective behavior according to this. You cannot get protective supervision to control antisocial or aggressive behavior. Now, ultimately, what they're referring to is simply behavior that is harmful to other people rather than harmful to the recipient. That's what they mean when they're saying aggressive. There's this, what I said the other day to Teresa was, when they talk about aggressive behavior, they mean much more the outcome rather than the mental, like the mood of the person. When your child might be angry and upset and really like yelling a lot, but if they're hitting themselves in the head or scratching themselves or biting themselves, IHSS doesn't consider that aggressive behavior. That's not what they mean. When they say aggressive behavior, they mean pulling your hair or punching you or kicking you or biting you. If they're doing behaviors that are exclusively harmful to you and not harmful to themselves, then that's aggressive behavior and that doesn't count. But what some people might call self-aggressive behavior, that does count. And that's a reason to get protective supervision. So for that reason, when we're handling cases and we have self-injurious behavior, we don't ever call it aggressive. Now, a person who has aggressive behavior or any of these other excluded behaviors can still qualify for protective supervision, but they have to have a non-excluded behavior in order to qualify. So that's the thing about aggressive behavior. And this is the one that I think most often when a social worker hears, oh, they get really aggressive and they hit their sibling and they hit themselves. Social worker in their mind, they hear the first half of that. They hear, oh, they're aggressive and they hit other people. All right, well, they can't get it. Check. No need for protective supervision. And they skip over the and they hit themselves part. Because a person who does both can get protective supervision. But if you describe it as them being aggressive, then that's all they hear. You're done for at that point. Okay, and I think there's one more excluded behavior, and this is actually kind of a big one, so hopefully I'll have enough time to get through it. But the last excluded behavior is that protective supervision is not given to guard against deliberate self-destructive behavior. Now, I say this is a big one because what should be fairly simple is misused a lot within IHSS. What they're talking about here is that if you have someone who fully understands the consequences of their actions, they know what they're doing, they know what the risks are, but they are willing to take that risk, or they just don't care about the risk, or they want to harm themselves, and they are aware that what they're doing will harm themselves, that person cannot get protective supervision. So this is talking about suicidal behavior or extreme risk taking from someone who doesn't have a mental impairment. They are just taking risks. This is not a person who can get protective supervision. You cannot get it for these kinds of reasons. However, where it goes wrong, and this is where ACL 1795 comes into play, and it gives social workers the wrong impression a whole lot. So let me read some parts of this. So it says, and this is ACL 1795, bottom of page 6 and going into page 7, if you want to check this out for yourself later. It says, a recipient who displays intentional self-destructive behavior with knowledge that the activity may cause self-harm would not be eligible for protective supervision. That makes sense. That's normal. However, it goes on and gives an example of someone who might know that what they're doing is harmful. And this is where it gets misused a lot. It says, this type of behavior may include tantrums or headbanging as a way to achieve a desired result. Well, this is a problem. And if you've been through this process, you've probably heard this a lot. They say, oh, they're headbanging as a way to achieve a desired result. Well, that's an excluded behavior. You can't get it for that. And it goes on. It says, in this case, the recipient would be considered self-directing as there is knowledge that the activity may cause self-harm. Therefore, he or she would be ineligible for protective supervision. And this has caused us so much trouble in these years. In the years since 2017, this has been so problematic because the first statement says very clearly that a person who intentionally harms themselves with knowledge that what they're doing is harmful cannot get it. That's fine. And the third sentence says, in a case like this, a person would be considered not eligible because they know what they're doing is causing them harm. That's also fine. But that middle sentence says, an example of this is a person who tantrums or headbangs as a way to achieve a desired result. Now, what we would say is when you put all of these together, what they're saying is a child who tantrums or headbangs to get a desired result and knows that what they're doing is causing them harm would be ineligible. And we would agree with that. However, the way it's used is, oh, any child that tantrums or headbangs to achieve a desired result knows that what they're doing is dangerous. Therefore, they cannot get protective supervision. And that is how it's been used by both social workers and judges. And it has caused us just a whole heap of problems forever. So what do we do about it? Well, it's for this reason that we very strongly advise people to, if possible, just not make any assumptions about why their children are doing things, not talk about, oh, well, they're doing it because we took away their ice cream, or we didn't drive them to Disneyland, or this or that. Is like, let's not talk about all those things, or at the very least, try to look for the times when that isn't the cause, right? Because they'll always say, well, if it was caused because you told them no, or you took away this, or you did that, not only will they say it's done intentionally, but they'll also say it's predictable, because they only have these sort of meltdowns or tantrums when you say something to trigger it. So there's no danger the rest of the time. So if you're trying to get protective supervision, always look out for those times where there is no trigger that you can identify. There is no controllable situation. It's just 1 minute everything's fine, and the next minute, boom, they're having their meltdown. They're head banging. They're throwing themselves backwards, hitting their head on whatever. Or I mean, it can be less extreme things as well. But this is what we always try to look out for, because if you say that it's caused by telling them this or telling them that, or denying them this or that, and the school usually will. The school will always talk about, well, they have problems with transitions, or when they are, go to a non-preferred activity, they have tantrums. They'll mention those things. So it's always important to find examples of when that isn't the case, when these things just happen without this kind of input. I'm going to briefly talk along these same lines about predictable behavior, because for the same reason, we also try to not always give a motive or a reason why they did a thing. We also try not to talk too much about what triggers it when it's not consistent, because sometimes behaviors might be triggered by circumstances, by having to transition to a new activity, of not being able to get what they want. But sometimes it happens for no reason, randomly. Sometimes it happens because they want to take a bath, but sometimes they're just in the middle of playing and all of a sudden they have a huge meltdown. And if you just say, oh, well, they really hate taking a bath, they always have a meltdown, they take a bath. Oh, they really don't like finishing their food. They really don't like, having to be dropped off at school. They always bang their head then. And you don't talk about the times when it happens randomly. They'll say, oh, it's predictable. Only happens those 3 times a day. And even though that's a lot of times, if you can identify when in the day it happens, can't get protective supervision. And this is just something that, as advice goes, we want you to be on the lookout for that. Sometimes you'll kind of be tricked into it, that either a social worker or a judge will say, okay, what kind of behaviors do they have? And you might mention headbanging. And they'll say, oh, well, when does that occur? Can you give me some examples? You'll give them a few examples, like, oh, well, it can happen when do this, or sometimes when this happens, sometimes when that happens. And if you don't specifically say, but also it happens just randomly for no reason, they'll say, oh, only ever happens at those 2 times. Say, or they'll say, can you give me an example of, when was the last time it happened? Oh, well, the last time it happened was when we were, trying to go to the beach, and they got the sand on their feet, and that texture bothered them, and they couldn't handle it. So it's like, oh, okay, good example. And then they'll write down, only ever has tantrums when they get sand on their feet. Right. So this is the kind of thing to look out for, is always make sure to clarify that you don't always know what the triggers are, and they can happen anytime. Okay, I think, did that cover? Oh, there was one more of these things that it's not technically one of the reasons to get, it's not technically a excluded behavior, but it's one that I wanted to talk about as well. And it's somewhere on here. Oh, here it is. This kind of goes back to the anticipation of a medical emergency, or other sort of like anticipated dangers. Is that, and this is going back to ACL 1525 again, is would they say, okay, I'll just read it word for word so that I don't get it wrong. So it says, the Calderon versus Anderson decision, and that's a superior court trial that set precedent for how IHSS works. It says, it states that protective supervision is not available merely to provide constant oversight in anticipation of environmental or medical emergencies or exigent circumstances. For example, a mentally ill, mentally impaired recipient who would not know how to exit his or her house in the event of a fire is not eligible for protective supervision based on that behavior or lack of appropriate response alone. So we've talked about this before, and this is something that they often ask, is the county will often ask, what would you do if there was a fire? And they'll ask, what's the situation and what they would do. And according to this, just because there could be a fire, or to give a few other examples, there could be an earthquake, could be a wildfire that comes through the whole town, or there could be a burglar, or there could be a stranger who comes to the front door and wants to kidnap them. Just because there could be any number of these dangers, and just because the person wouldn't know what to do in these situations, that by itself is not enough of a reason to get protective supervision. There has to be something active that they will do if left alone that will cause danger. Now, if they themselves would do something that might cause a fire and then not know what to do in the case of a fire, then that's good enough. Then they can get protective supervision. But just the fact that they wouldn't know what to do if there was a fire is not enough of a reason for them to get protective supervision. So I hope that was helpful. We went over a whole bunch of these sort of minute issues in protective supervision. We do have a few more minutes if you guys want to ask any last minute questions. But before we go, I just want to say again, I'm saying this for Caleb's benefit because, it's always good to say, go ahead and leave a like, comment, or share this with anyone that you think will benefit from this. Anyone who's trying to get protective supervision or trying to get IHSS you think will benefit from this, let them know. And thank you all for coming today. I don't think we have any events or anything like that coming up right now, but we will definitely let you know. We have things going on all the time. We do seminars, we do Zoominars for special education and IHSS and all kinds of other things like that. So follow us here on Facebook or our YouTube channel, and we're constantly trying to put out information, and we'll let you know about any events that we do have coming up. So thank you all for being here. If you speak Spanish, Nicole's going to go live in about 10 minutes. So you can check her out and see what's going on there. I think she's going to talk about the same topic as well. So if you have any more questions, you can leave it with her. I think Caleb is going to be back. We're going to be back to our normal. Actually, is it Q&A next week?
Yep.
Oh, we're going to do Q&A next week. So it's going to be me and Caleb here together answering any questions you have related to special needs. So look forward to that, and we'll see you then. All right. Have a good Friday, everybody.